All right, so do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Ian Andrews. I am the inventory manager at Oaken Brothers Shoes, downtown Kalamazoo.
Wonderful. All right, so what do you think of when you hear the word masculinity? It's a tough one.
It's a very specific but very abstract question. A lot of projections. Stoicism, the man on the brawny paper towels, flannel shirt, strong jawline, authority.
Yeah. It's like the more stereotypical vibe of the word.
It's just a cluster of stereotypes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so thinking back to when you were in high school and your relationships with other boys your age, do you remember ever having to feel like you had to, like, act masculine? Like it was like a presentation that you had to perform almost?
I think, not to speak for others, but yeah, I think everyone is trying to be accepted in high school, so you act what you think is manly. You're just learning how to swear.
Yeah.
You're learning about, you're having your first relationships, you're braggadocious, it's all performative.
Yeah, for sure.
Everyone is trying so hard and they wind up exactly the same, and it's embarrassing to look back on.
Yeah, definitely. So this kind of stems from that question, but how, if at all, do you think that societal definitions of manhood and masculinity have affected your own ways of interpreting masculinity?
I think as time has gone on, I have been more and more able to distance my own self-acceptance from society's expectations of a man. But certainly late teens, early 20s, I was, I need to be in the gym, I need to look this way, I need to eat this way, I need to talk this way, dress this way. And as I've been able to more and more reject that stereotype, I've been acting and appearing and being more authentically myself.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, so you objectively are growing up in the generation that kind of interprets masculinity the most fluidly, right? So you have had a bit more freedom in regards to expression and things like that than other generations. However, do you ever recall having, because you're existing in a space with other generations, having altercations or just circumstances in which your masculinity was not as safe to be presented in more free ways because you were existing with people who had those own stereotypical views in their minds? Like, I'm thinking older generations.
I have been fortunate enough in life to find myself largely in situations where, in the periods where I was putting on the face, I was still in a safe enough area that I had no problems with anyone. And in more recent years, being who I am present day, I like to think I project it with such confidence and in such a way as to not incite conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this is actually my last question for you, but it's kind of a loaded one. I know. So if you had to come up with your own definition of masculinity based on your own lived experiences and perceptions, what would it be?
I think that is a question that is tricky to answer currently, and in 50 years will be impossible, because that verbiage surrounding that kind of gender binary is becoming more and more of a gray area each passing day. I mean, it's such a broad word that really no longer applies to half the things it used to. So as to define my own definition of masculinity, it's really whoever feels masculine decides it is.
Yeah, like a personal.
Not to me to say.
Yeah.
That word is not mine to define.
I can appreciate that. All right, that's all I've got. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. All right, so now to go over and sort of dissect that interview. My brother is he was born on the line between Millennial and Gen Z. So very modern concepts, taught very modern ways of thinking, and has seen a lot of societal reformation and participated in it. When asked the question of what is masculinity, he did still know those same stereotypes, the physicality, the performance, the strength. He said he thought of stoicism and the brawny paper towel man. And I think that very much aligns with the hegemonic masculinity that we've seen in all three of these interviews, spanning across generations. And there's something to be said about the persistence of hegemonic masculinity, that when the word masculinity is spoken, those societal structural standards of the past are still brought to mind. However, there's also something to be said about the fact that we can recognize it while also recognizing the fact that that might not be applicable to where our society is today, and that might not be how we want our society to be today. It's also interesting that he noted that within high school, he still felt that need to perform masculinity, that need to be in the gym, to be eating this, to be saying this, to be acting this way, to perform masculinity. And he said everyone is trying to be accepted. You act what you think is manly. It's all performative. And the phrase "you act what you think is manly" reveals a lot about how within adolescence we still think of manly in the very stereotypical ways. And there is still that process of unlearning that has to be undergone, because he, in the same way that my father noted, stated that as you grow older, you find the ability to distance yourself. As you grow up, you learn to disregard. I also want to point out in this interview, because it's the last, the progression that I saw while interviewing them, specifically regarding the last question asked, the what would be your personal definition of masculinity. My grandfather gave one quite readily, and it very much focused on appearance, physical manifestation of the stereotypical masculinity. My father's was hard to think up, and ultimately revolved around just the ability to be who you are. My brother refused to get one, and that is a progression that I think so represents where our society is in terms of recognizing masculinity apart from hegemonic masculinity, that we now don't have a definition. And as he said, it's whoever feels masculine wants it to be. This recognition that it is a personal interpretation as much as it is a personal performance, is modern, it's new, it's fresh, highly controversial at times. And I think the most groundbreaking thing out of that whole interview for me was the suggestion that, like, 50 years from now, the word may very well be meaningless. And I think that leaves a lot to think about. I think it leaves a lot to think about the function of masculine as a word in our vocabulary now, and what our vocabulary would be without it. So I personally don't know what to make of that as a whole. I know what to make of it for myself. But for the purpose of these interviews, I know that after having this one with someone who is a young adult in society, who has learned how to be masculine in the ways most individualized, I know that hegemonic masculinity is being very much phased out of our society. And I think that while all of these people that I interviewed, crossing multiple generations, did have that same experience with confronting hegemonic masculinity in adolescence, I think that the way that society is moving, as these millennials and Gen Z folks grow older and raise children, hegemonic masculinity may not be something that has to be faced in adolescence. Masculinity might just mean a personal, individualistic representation of what you feel to be masculine.